Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy, and I'm a recovered media addict of the hopeless variety. I'm very happy to be here today to tell you my story. The title of my qualification is Looking for God in All the Wrong Places. Today, I'm going to share my story and my journey in recovery. I'm going to talk about my life and how I became very ill from media addiction. I'm going to talk about how media became my mother, my father, my lover, my savior, and my higher power. I'm going to talk about how media also became the device that led to my constant discomfort, self doubt, self loathing, body dysphoria, suicidal thoughts, and depression. I'm going to share with you what I learned about media addiction, how I struggled for a long time, and how I recovered. I want to start off by saying that technology has been an amazing tool for me in my life. I can speak to people I love who are far away and even see their faces. I save time contacting others and learn things that would take me months to find out in a library. I can be in a new city and get to my destination easily without looking at a map. If it were not for media, I would not be able to even have the recovery in my 12-step programs now that I have. And I have a lot of gratitude for electronic media. When I use media, it absolutely can make my life better. But when media uses me, my life, my goals, my relationship become adversely affected. In the history of humankind, electronic media is still very new. For thousands of years, no human beings used any kind of electronic media to live and survive ever. Our era is the first to try it out. The first radio broadcast for public consumption was in 1920. The first television broadcast was in 1954. First paid cable TV was in 1972. Cable news and 24-hour streaming began in 1980. The first smartphone came out in 1992, and it was around 2007 that we could start to watch videos on our phones. The effects of electronic media on people have not been studied that long. For instance, I read one study that said that when TV was first introduced in a community, the suicide rate went up in teenage girls. And in my life, I have done my own personal study of the effects of media on my brain, my emotions, and on my will to succeed. What I see is that I have compulsively used media for a lot of my life. I've used it for relief, reward, relaxation, recreation, and in place of personal relationships. I can only speak for myself on the effects media has had on me. And I want to say that I don't speak for Media Addicts Anonymous as a whole. This is my story only. Part of my personal research has been to observe that I was on who I was, to observe who I was on media and who I was off media. There was a time I was on a 17-day meditation retreat where I meditated in the mountains away from all civilization. After the retreat, I remember going into a store and hearing the sound of the music, the slick, shiny magazines, even the lighting felt so invasive and almost violent to me. It was if I was entering into another world, and I could see the illusion of it all. There was one time that I fasted from all moving pictures for 8.5 months, and it was one of the happiest and most productive times of my life. At that time, I didn't have a fellowship and a program, and the information I'm going to give you today to see the true nature of my compulsion with media. But after I'd fasted an 8.5 months, a friend asked me to go to the movies with him. I figured, now I have it under control. Let me try a movie. We ended up at an action movie in one of those surround sound theaters with the special seats that make you feel like you're in your living room, but also right in the middle of the action. The sounds of the characters punching and attacking each other penetrated my whole body. The music was painfully loud. I had to put my napkin into my ears because they ached. The gripping storyline took my emotions all over the place. I was shaking physically through most of it. When I left, I felt I had been completely beaten up. My friend couldn't figure out why I was so sore and emotionally spent. It took me a week to get over watching that movie. I asked myself, how did I ever watch those movies before? What I learned was how violent these movies are on the mind, psyche, and body. I learned that I am sensitive and that I can't do what I see others do. Had I known then what I know now, I would have stayed on my media fast, but I didn't realize that I was dealing with an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind. I didn't have the mental defense against picking up media again. I have come to see that my greatest power and greatest commodity is my attention. What I focus on, or what I focus my attention on, grows. All media, by its very makeup, is focused on trying to get my attention and hold it. It's constantly finding ways to seep into my life so I will watch it, pay attention to it. If I never picked up media, my focus and attention would be on those things that I care about the most, like my loved ones and my creative goals. I would be able to feel inside myself what is true for me, and I would not look to another source to tell me who I am and what I should be. The problem media had on me was that it puts forth a version of reality, a version of the truth. Media creates the world by its stories that try to influence me. It's seductive and unrelentingly beautiful. As a child, I watched TV and movies, and the reality I saw on TV was what I wanted. I looked at the ads in magazines and wanted to look like what I saw. I wanted all the toys I saw in the commercials. What media seemed to be doing to me was showing me a feast of the most amazing delights, creating a deep desire in me to possess them, to eat this feast. But the real truth was, these things were not real. They were fantasy. And even if I did get the toys I saw in the commercial, once I got them, often they were not half as cool as the commercial. Sigmund Freud has influenced on many levels the way society looks at ourselves. Even AA, the first 12-step program, was born out of Freud's student Carl Jung, who was influential in bringing alcoholics the idea of a spiritual awakening to alleviate alcoholism. Strangely enough, when it comes to the effect of media on the human mind, Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, used Freud's psychological methods as a way of understanding human psychology, and he put Freud's theories into his marketing and creating a new kind of consumerism that had not existed before. For example, when he started working for American Tobacco Company, Bernays was given the objective of increasing their sales among women who, for the most part, had formerly avoided smoking. The first strategy was to persuade women to smoke cigarettes instead of eating. Bernays began by promoting the ideal of thinness itself, using photographers, artists, newspapers, and magazines to promote the special beauty of thin women. Medical authorities were found to promote the choice of cigarettes over sweets. Homemakers were cautioned that keeping cigarettes on hand was a social necessity. This is only one example of how media has been used to influence me and create a craving and a need in me to try to be acceptable in society. Media tells me if I look a certain way, have the right gadgets, know the right information, I will get love, validation, and wealth. Just click this ad, and that's all there is to it. I have studied hypnosis. You have no idea how easy it is to hypnotize people. I have done it many times. The first thing you do is to relax them and then put them in an alpha wave state of mind. I don't believe it is an accident that the alpha wave was used as the wave to create movies and TV for all moving pictures. When we watch anything moving on the screen, our brains automatically go into alpha waves, and alpha states are very suggestible. We are working with the subconscious in those states, and the subconscious is not capable of logical thinking. It accepts as true the information being given it. Not only that, many TV and cable shows have a spinning introduction and music that also takes you into a hypnotic state. This is especially true for news stations. There is always something spinning and something moving. The spinning hypnotizes you. The constant movement stimulates the reptilian brain to focus your attention on the screen, much like a cat will focus on a mouse. And every time the mouse moves, the cat re-engages. Media addiction or internet disorders has been researched now for over 10 years. What medical professionals have discovered is that media addiction is very similar to alcoholism. One doctor writes, some evidence suggests that if you are suffering from media addiction, your brain makeup is similar to those who suffer from a chemical dependency, such as drugs or alcohol. Interestingly, some studies link media addiction to physically changing the brain structure, specifically affecting the amount of gray and white matter in regions of the prefrontal brain. This area of the brain is associated with remembering details, attention, planning, and prioritizing tasks. One of the causes of media addiction is structural changes to the prefrontal region of the brain, rendering you unable to prioritize your life, i.e., the internet takes precedent to necessary tasks. Media addiction, in addition to other dependency disorders, seems to affect the pleasure center of the brain. The addictive behavior triggers a release of dopamine to promote the pleasurable experience, activating the release of this chemical. Over time, more and more of the activity is needed to induce the same pleasurable response, creating a dependency. For instance, if you find online gaming or online shopping a pleasurable activity, you will suffer from an addiction to the internet. You will need to engage in more and more of the behavior to institute the same pleasurable feeling prior to your dependency. So, what we learned from this article is that a media addict's brain is similar to that of an alcoholic. We see that media changes the structure of the brain, that this structural change makes it so that we can't prioritize and manage our lives well. Like alcohol, there is a physical component to media addiction, a release of dopamine that creates a pleasurable state in the media addict's body, which then triggers a compulsion for more and more media to gain the same initial dopamine hit, which then creates a dependency. It is no secret that everything has been done to make media as addictive as possible, but it's all been done in a very subtle way. What I didn't know was that I had developed a dependency long before I could perceive it. It's something that came upon me when I was so young, and before I even knew it, that it was already a part of my character makeup and even my identity. If you want to boil a frog, you don't just put him into boiling water because he'll jump right out. The way to boil a frog is to put him in a pot of cool water and then slowly raise the heat. He won't know that he's being boiled until it's too late. Media has been like that for me. It has seeped into our lives slowly and subtly until we can't even go into a gas station without a TV blasting commercials at the gas pump. Media is ubiquitous. It's in the air we breathe. As a species, we used to do without it and survive. Now we depend on it for everything. Being on this journey of media recovery has been a journey to remember who I was before the world told me who I should be. Let me begin at the beginning. It is a well-known understanding amongst recovery therapists that the cause of addiction is the inability to connect. If trauma happened early in one's life, the natural ability to bond and integrate with others is impeded. The first year of my life left me feeling abandoned and without parents to bond with. I'm the middle daughter of 5 girls, and although I grew up in the same household, each of us had a different view of mother and father and a different growing up experience. When I was barely a year old, my father went away to war for a year, leaving my mother, myself, and my two older sisters to survive on our own. A month after he was gone, my mother, who was pregnant, violently miscarried at 6 months and ended up in the hospital for a full month. Then, when she came out of the hospital, she was in bed for 2 more months. I was taken care of by my aunt and grandmother. This event left me unable to bond with my main caregivers. It left me yearning for my mom. And since I had not had time to bond with my dad, it left me distrustful of this man who was loud and often angry. So the number one cause for addiction was set in motion at that early age. I want to state emphatically that today I accept this was not my parents' fault, nor was it God's fault. This is just information that I can observe now as an adult looking back and see that the seeds of addiction, i.e., the way I was going to try to survive my life, had been planted within the first 2 years of my life. Our family grew to 5 daughters in all. My mother always seemed nervous and weak, and my father angry and controlling. My oldest sister was a bully and a tease, and I avoided her as much as I could. I saw early on that I was on my own. I could not depend on my mother nor turn to my father or sisters. Like an animal in the wild, I found ways to protect myself through camouflage, like looking like I fit in and just trying to be invisible. Because of this inability to connect, there grew in me the hopelessness that I could never be loved because I was unworthy of love. We were a religious family, and the teachings that I received about God, who seemed as angry and imposing as my father, created within me a constant fear that I was being bad and I would surely go to hell, which was a kind of outer darkness. The truth was, a lot of the time, I felt like I was in hell, in my mind, that is, and I took myself into outer darkness all the time by isolating myself before God or anyone else could sentence me to that fate. Fantasy became my escape, my way to survive everyone, even God's wrath. In kindergarten, I was painfully shy, and a teacher had assigned a little girl to be my friend, and she and I became best friends, and I loved her, and I was able to connect with her. She and I really got each other, and a few years I felt loved and accepted by another person. But events in my family and my compulsive need for media finally isolated me from this person who I cared about. The event that led to even more fantasy and TV was the year I started first grade. That year, my mother lost another baby girl, but this time the baby lived for 18 hours. And because of a birth trauma, she ended up dying. At this time, I was baby crazy, and this baby was going to be my baby. My mother had also been really weakened by the delivery so that she was not even able to attend the funeral. My father had to take over all of the duties of the household, and I remember he explained to me what death was and what would happen to my little sister. He was very tender with me, and it is a memory of my dad that showed me who he really was, the dad that I came to know later in my life when he had Alzheimer's. But my world had been shattered, and I had no clue at that time really how much my parents' world had been shattered because I couldn't see that and I couldn't see them. That year, the country had also been shattered, for that was the year that JFK, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. Even before the death of my youngest sister, my parents were having some marital problems, and my mother, a perfectionist, was beginning to lose control. And my father, the ultimate director, seemed even more to try to keep things under control. The result was my mom having a nervous breakdown and ending up in the hospital again. This going in and out of the hospital actually went on for about a year, and I think there may have been 3 hospital visits total. She went to calm her nerves, and eventually she was put on Valium, which was very common for that time. And so it was at this point where my mom was not able to be emotionally there for me, as the Valium created a barrier between us. I had trouble learning at school and had trouble interacting with others. And I think it was partly because of all the things that had gone on in my home the year I began school. And the usual playground bullying and mean girl stuff was too much for me. I retreated to even more TV and food in those years. And TV and food were my first drugs of choice. I would come home from school and watch TV and eat in front of it. I never wanted to do my homework, and I always would just wait till the last minute. I didn't care about anything but being alone with the fantasy world on TV. My best friend would call me up and ask me to come out to play, but I would tell her that I couldn't and lie that my mom wouldn't let me. The truth was, I just wanted my drug. I didn't want her. I didn't want anyone. I especially didn't want my life. Eventually, my best friend stopped calling, and I lost her to another friend, another girl. As I grew up in my adolescence, this was the time when the model Twiggy was popular. And so she became my role model. And she was very skinny and boyish looking. She had no breasts and no hips. So when I was 12 and started to develop, I became frightened of my own body. I hated what was happening to me. I felt that I was getting fat because I had hips and breasts. My thinking was that no guy would want me. Because I grew up with all girls, I had no idea that these changes were actually good things and that they could attract boys. I remember even looking at a couple thinking, what does he see in her? She has such big boobs. And I couldn't be more naive, really, because I just had such a bad opinion of my body and my nature. I believed if I was not perfect and looked like the girls on TV and magazines, no one would love me. So fast forward to early teen years. And this is a story about my relationship with God, but also my relationship with my family. And this is where, and I tell this story because there was a break here that happened in me. When I was about 8 years old in Sunday school, a teacher told me a story about a little girl who gave away her doll to another little girl on Christmas because the little girl had no presents. Now, I loved my dolls, and I thought that I would never be able to do something like that. And if I could not be that unselfish, it logically followed that I would never be able to get into heaven. So this was the thought that had had been seated in me at that time. So at the time when I no longer believed that there was a Santa and no longer was so cared and so much about Christmas, I decided that I would give the ultimate sacrifice. I was going to give away my Christmas to someone I didn't know. And I was going to do this absolutely selflessly because it would be anonymous. And in doing this, I would prove that I would be worthy to go to heaven. So I had a lot of motives around this. I told my mom what I wanted to do, and she gave me $20 to buy a gift. And I chose an elderly woman. I was disappointed with the $20 because I thought my mother would probably have given me more than $20 worth of presents, but I didn't complain. I bought the gifts, and on Christmas Eve, our whole family got into the car to go caroling, and we always gave out Christmas cookies to our neighbors. I had one medium-sized box that held my anonymous whole Christmas, which I was very excited to give away. When we stopped at this woman's house, I got out, took the box to her doorstep, rang the doorbell. We stayed long enough to see her open the door, and then we took off. In the car, everyone was laughing and talking about Christmas and other things. I was sitting in the back seat waiting to hear, Cindy, we are so proud of you. You gave away your Christmas. What a generous thing to do. But no one, not even my mom, validated my sacrifice. My resolve began to wilt. I could not feel myself. I could feel myself starting to collapse into self-pity. I could feel that God, who I was trying to impress, was seeing that I was really a selfish person because the truth was I didn't have the spiritual bandwidth to completely do this totally selfless act. I wanted Christmas presents. I hoped that mom and dad would still have gotten me gifts for Christmas Day. I hoped against hope that that would happen. This must be why they're not commenting about my heroism. The next morning, I woke up and all my sisters were excited to go into the tree. I alone felt very little enthusiasm. I hoped against hope that at least one present would be under the tree for me to open. I sat on the sofa and watched everyone open their gifts, waiting to see if there was something there for me and trying not to cry. Most of the gifts had been opened without one of them addressed to me. To add insult to injury, one of my sisters looked at me sulking on the sofa and she said without much compassion, "What's the matter, Cindy? You look like you're going to cry." I saw my family going about their celebration without a thought for me. No one noticed what I was going through. I felt myself even more alone than before. It was at this moment that something in me just broke. I said to them in my heart, "That's it, you guys. We are over. From this day on, you are not my family." And I emotionally cut myself off. I orphaned myself right then and there. And because I had done all of this to please the God of my understanding at the time, I said, "God, that's it. We're over." And I hardened myself to a God who would ask for such a sacrifice. But it was mostly that I hated myself for not being strong enough to be able to pass this self imposed test. My part in this was that I wanted an easy way to get to heaven. And so I made a grand gesture. And much like Cain, I guess, in the Bible, I didn't think my offering was accepted by God. So I hated God and the way my concept of God made me feel. So now I disconnected from my family and I'm disconnected from God. I was on my own and I did everything I could to not need anyone. And I didn't need them anyway, for when I needed relief and comfort, I had TV and sweets. They worked for me way more than God and people did. And that was the time I really went into defiance. High school turned out to be some good years for me. So I had some good times in high school. I was able to find some ways to build my self esteem. I got into theater and plays. I love to write plays. My senior year, I was voted as one of the student body officers, and I had some notoriety writing for assemblies and taking on leading roles in school plays. I was no longer the shy girl, but I was still a bit of a loner. Media and food at that time held much less importance in my life. I was too busy living and being creative. Also, when I went to college, I didn't use media very much. I went to college to become an actress and a writer. And my first years, I had some real ups and downs. Boyfriend troubles landed me home with my tail between my legs. I wanted to go. I didn't want to go. I did not want to go back home. I wanted to go anywhere but back home. But that's how desperate I was. I finally tried to fit in and go to church. I went back to college eventually, and I met a man at church who was to be my husband. And we met. 3 years later, we were engaged. 3 months later, we were married. And 3 months later, we moved to Boston so he could go to school. I was in a big city, didn't know anyone but my husband, and I was trying to find a job and be a wife and know how to be an adult. I was 20 years old. When I met my husband, I was really not using food or media in any real compulsive way. But as we dated, a few unfortunate questions from him, like, "Will you remain young and thin and beautiful?" triggered in me the great fear of not being worthy of love if I was not perfect. All the ways in which movies and TV had taught me that I must be in order to be loved, and and all the compare and despair that had been my constant companion from my early years triggered deep panic in me. And the survival system that I had started earlier kicked in with a vengeance and had even upgraded itself to a full fledged addiction. For 13 years, I was bulimic. I realize now that it was because I could not stomach my life, my thinking, my fears. I ate to stuff it all down, and I threw up to release it all. It was an emotional ceremony that I performed many times a day. And of course, media was a huge part of that ceremony. I did not want to eat unless I was watching TV. They went hand in hand. Eventually, my husband and I separated. I felt that I would not be able to recover if I stayed in that relationship. And I just want to make it very clear, I don't blame him for my discomfort. He was and is a very good man. We have a very good relationship. I was wounded and traumatized by my thoughts and ideas about who I should be. Many of those ideas came from media. My part is that I accepted them as reality. I believed them. That was my part. So I became a single mom, struggling to both recover and survive. I had found OA in 1984, shortly after my second child was born. They say if you want to know why you are drinking, stop drinking. I got abstinent in OA and then got extremely depressed. I was so desperate. I took my two children home to my parents and stayed there for a month while my husband was finishing up his finals. Now, I'm backtracking. This was before we got divorced. I felt that I had found a solution to my problem because I was abstinent with food. But one day I realized that I did not miss my husband, even though I'd been writing to him that I did. I saw that I had been lying to myself. I saw that I was miserable in the marriage. I saw that I was in over my head and I could not see how to get out. So I binged. I was so afraid, I told my mother she had to put me into a mental hospital or I would relapse. I spent a week in a mental hospital and began to finally speak my truth. I don't think I had ever been honest with myself my whole life. The truth was, I did not see a way out for me to recover from bulimia and stay in my marriage. I also saw that I could not stay in the religion that I had grown up in. I didn't feel like I could stay in either of these and stay abstinent. I did not know why. I don't blame either of them, but that's where I was at that time. So after the divorce, I set about trying to recover. I failed a lot. I would be up all night binge watching TV and then purging until 3 a.m. And then I'd go into my children's room and just cry, feeling that they were growing up without me. I was like my mom, numbed out all the time. And I was missing this one chance to enjoy them while they were young. In 1989, I finally started to get my life back. I went into treatment for 6 weeks and dried out. I had a lot of therapy and created a good aftercare plan for myself. When I got out, I went to a meeting a day. I called my sponsor daily, and I didn't binge no matter what. In the treatment center, I took the first 3 steps. In OA, I went through the steps a few times using the AA 12 and 12. I read the big book a little bit, but mostly I just went to meetings and weighed and measured my food. I went back to school and studied theater, film, and video. This time was a wonderful, productive time for me. I didn't have time for media, and I was sober with food. My creativity was alive, and I felt like I was on my way to success. When I got out of treatment, they told me not to get into any relationships for 1 year, to spend the time getting to know myself and focus on my recovery. So, as not to get into any relationships, I dated a lot of different people at one time. Because I never really worked the steps fully and thoroughly, and especially never really understood my real disease, those years were a lot of compulsive work, the need to prove, running around with my tail cut off. I felt if I just kept moving, I would be okay. And as long as I didn't binge, anything else was acceptable. So I went to a graduate program in acting, and oh my goodness, it was excruciating. It was like living in my dysfunctional family again, and my need to prove that I had talent and my ever present fear of failing and perfectionism depressed me many times. I got through my 3 year program still abstinent, but not in recovery. I had gone to fewer meetings and I did not really have a great support group. I was trying to do it all on my own. After graduation, I began my career as an actor, and I had some wonderful, really great early successes. I was beginning to build a reputation, be cast in some wonderful shows, commercials, industrials, and print work.
I was beginning to feel that I was finally going to make it. My self confidence in this field was starting to grow, and I was taking control of my life. Then I happened to connect with a man from college that I had known earlier and who I had refused to go out with before because I felt A, that he was too young and emotionally immature, and B, that he was always talking about sex and would always try and massage all the girls in the class. I really disliked him at that time. But when I saw him after many years, he seemed different. No braces on his teeth, was more mature and finding some real success as an actor himself and as a model. He was completely infatuated with me, which both made me nervous and totally it hooked me in. Right from the beginning, I knew that if I got involved with him, I was going to be hurt and it was going to take me a long time to get out of such a relationship. And what I didn't really knew, but I also sensed that it was going to take me a long time to recover from that relationship. Like a moth to a flame, I succumbed to his charms, for now I know that there are few sex addicts that are not absolutely charming and alluring. I didn't know in the beginning that he was a sex addict. In fact, neither did he. He was 13 years younger than I was, and I felt inadequate to fulfill his fantasies. He made comments about my body that really hurt. I wanted to break off with him, but I also couldn't for some reason. I think it was because I was addicted to him, though I didn't know it. With the help of a friend who was in 12-step programs, I was told what was going on. He was a sex addict and I, his co addict. My response to this relationship was not bulimia, as it had been in my marriage. I don't think I set out to be anorexic, for I was not trying to control my food, but I could not stomach my life and this relationship. I had a hard time eating regularly, and I got down to 103 pounds. I was in so much pain, I started to want to cut myself. And I had never, in my most deepest and suicidal depression, which I did have a lot of that with my bulimia, had I ever wanted to physically hurt myself. I thought that if I could cut myself, the pain would ease out of me with my blood. I did not do that to myself, but I once hit my head on a steel post again and again until my boyfriend made me stop. I was between a rock and a hard place. To be in the relationship was excruciatingly painful. To not be in the relationship and lose him was equally excruciating. I prayed to God or to whatever being to help me get out of this relationship because I knew I couldn't. I got into SLAA and he got into SA. We both tried to recover together, but in the end, we had to part. I bring up this experience for two reasons. One, that my disease, like my bulimia and the disease of bulimia, was able to transmogrify into another addiction. It didn't care what it was using, just that it was using something to relieve me from my pain and my emotions and also take me away from my life. It to take me into fantasy, let's put it that way. And to that, the mind altering and mood altering drug that is media created trouble in my relationship, since the fantasy that had been daily and hypnotically applied to my partner's porn addiction could never be lived out in the reality of our relationship. I would never be able to look like those women that he lusted after, nor perform like those women that he desperately wanted to have. I would never be able to compete with the power of sexual fantasy. My short lived experience as a newcomer to porn and what it did to my brain and psyche is something to bring up here. Because as I said earlier, media is hypnotic. It alters the brain waves, it alters the mood. And when it is connected to sexual energy, it's like media on steroids, literally. I had to know what he was watching, so I made him give me all his porn, and I watched it nonstop for about 8 hours. When I was finished, I went to the grocery store and everything looked and seemed different. The man behind the counter suddenly was making flirtatious innuendos, or I saw everyone look more sexual. It was completely mind altering. This is how he lives daily, I thought. No wonder he is always intriguing with people. Who wouldn't if they were constantly watching porn? Media in the form of porn made me hate myself and my body, made me even hate my sexual desires because I felt that either I had to be a sexual slave or be alone, and alone meant not wanted, rejected, disgraced, and discarded. When I was finally able to leave that relationship, I was bankrupt in every part of my life. I had completely stopped acting since my boyfriend would get insanely jealous of any role in which I played a lover or partner. I couldn't work and I was in a huge amount of debt from school. I was emotionally and physically drained. My experience with him proved that what I was afraid of the most, that I, it proved the thing that I was afraid of the most. And that was that if I was not perfectly beautiful, I could not be loved. I would never be loved. I didn't deserve to be loved. I made another major pact, this time with myself, that I would never let anyone ever hurt me like that again. I didn't care if I had to be alone the rest of my life. I would never put myself in that vulnerable place again. At rock bottom, I went to Debtors Anonymous to take care of my debts. I had a lot of pieces to put back together. I started teaching yoga and looking into spirituality. I went on a 17-day meditation retreat looking for relief from my pain and the early withdrawal from my sex addicted partner, and came home in a much better place. I had even had one of those awakenings that they talk about in yoga and Eastern religions when the world was transformed into heaven. All the trees are filled with light, and I was filled with pure light and joy and ecstasy. But I could not stay in this state. My ego could not handle this level of joy and bliss. So I eventually crashed. My need to prove my worth to prove that I had a right to be alive was back. I was eventually able to start my own business. And this is again a time where I was very productive. I was able to get out of debt. I was now living by myself and taking care of myself alone, the first time in my life without help from the government, my dad, or anyone. I felt good and I felt that I was making progress and I was back into 12-step programs, but I still was not working the steps. I was just staying solvent and abstinent. At this time, food and media were fairly neutral. I was using media to relax after work, but didn't feel like it was taking over my life. Yes, sometimes I would fall asleep in front of it. But this was back in 2006, 2007. There wasn't as many ways to get media at that time. I did binge now and again, but it was not something that I felt was a problem for me. At least it was not making my life unmanageable. Then I decided I wanted to write a book. I would take time off work and go on these writing retreats. I was full of fear about if I had the chops to write a book. So when I sat down to write, I would avoid working on it by just getting on media and just researching for hours on end. And they were lots of times they were things to do with my book, but a lot of time they had nothing to do with my book. I just would go down a rabbit hole and I would binge watch movies and shows for days at a time. And I'd end up going home with very little writing done. I did this again and again. Each time I would create a writing schedule for myself and really try and stick to it. And each time I would spend half the time binge watching, staying up late to watch, and not being able to stay on my schedule. This is where I began to see that media was making my life unmanageable. It had been something that I thought had helped me make my discomfort manageable, but now it was something that actually was working against me. At this point, something really changed. I found that when I wanted to stop using media, I couldn't. I had developed, I had actually developed a dependency on it. So, here are some of the things that I've discovered in myself when I know that I have an addiction to something or someone. One, it is something I turn to that I think will make me feel better, but ends up making me feel worse. 2, I develop a daily dependency on it. 3, when I remove the addiction, there is withdrawal, physical, mental, and emotional withdrawal. 4, I have feelings of guilt and shame around the behavior and I try to hide it. 5, I can't seem to stop on my own, or I can stop for a time, but I can't remain stopped. 6, I put my life or someone else's life at risk to get my fix. 7, I have mental suffering about my behavior. 8, over time, it's all I want. It's all I think about getting. 9, every attempt I make to stop, I fail at. 10, I feel depressed and despair that anything will ever change. I feel hopeless. 11, this leads to suicidal thoughts. I don't want to live this way anymore, but I don't know how to live without it. And 12, I lose all meaning and purpose in my life. I lose the vitality of my life. At this time, I could see that I had all these symptoms. I started hunting for a 12-step program for this addiction, for media addiction. I went online and looked for a group, and I could not find one. Surely there had to be a program for media addiction because there's programs for everything out there, but I couldn't find it in any search. In 2015, I somehow got so desperate and had enough willingness to fast from moving pictures that I decided to do it. I was do it for 6 months. That was my goal. In the beginning of this fast, I did feel a lot of withdrawal, but I stuck to it. And after the third month, everything got so much easier. I started to feel like a child again, to feel who I was before TV came into my life. I felt more freedom, self love, and joy in my life. I felt and looked younger. I slept better, ate better, and felt clearer than ever before. Moreover, I was able to complete the first draft of my book. I continued to fast for another 2.5 months. So I fasted 8.5 months total. And I felt proud of myself when I returned from the best writing retreat I'd ever had. Now, if I'd stayed on this fast, you would never have heard my story today because I think I would have just kept going on and doing all this on my own. But as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of my talk, I didn't know how baffling and powerful media addiction was for me. So I went to my first movie, and it was not long after that that I let down on all the rules that I had around media and just started to widen my media usage. Did not take much time for me to go back to where I was before. The timing could not have been worse, for at this time I was about to go through a very difficult time in my life. The rug was pulled out from me in so many ways. First of all, I got bed bugs in my apartment, which was also the place that I saw clients, so I could not work for 3 months. And then after that, because of what was happening emotionally in my life, I ended up not working for 6 months total. So I was off work for 6 months. The thing that was so emotional for me was that my son, who we're very, very close, was dating someone who didn't like me, had real problems with me. And this threw me into a constant need to prove and to just get emotionally drunk on shame and guilt and feelings of loss around my son. It was as if someone had just died suddenly in my life. And I was in so much panic that I turned to media for relief. I turned to it to relax my mind, to get out of the pain. And it was during this time I became a YouTube addict. And I just watched for hours a day. I would go down one rabbit hole after another. I felt like a total loser. I felt excommunicated from my son's life. I felt suicidal again, which amazed me since I thought I'd really finally gotten my life together. Media addiction just kicked my butt. I was so depressed because I could not find help. When I talked about it to others, they didn't get it. I mean, it was like I was killing myself with drugs or alcohol. They didn't see that I was killing myself. I was dying daily in my comatose state in front of media, and I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. I had even tried to start a face to face media addicts program in my area. It lasted for about 3 months, had only 4 members, and we just didn't work well together. And no one seemed as bad off as I did. Then in 2016, the US election coverage happened, and we all know what that means. I was never interested in the news, but suddenly I was watching everything compulsively. Every day I would either graze or binge watch. I was getting high on the dopamine or adrenaline hits. My emotions were governed by what I heard or saw on media, and the plans to further my life goals that day would be diverted by whatever I heard on the news. Suddenly, I would feel the need to research anything that upset me. National and world events became more important than my goals, my health, my family. Many days I would stay in all day, not getting any sun or exercise, which made me feel even worse. So there's a lyric to a song that really ran through my head at this time, and the lyric is, "You want to change the world, but you can't even change yourself." I wanted to control what was happening in the world, but I could not even change what was happening in my world, in my head, in my life. I decided to do something radical. I decided to attend, and this sounds funny that I say this radical for me now because for me then, because it's not at all radical for me now. I decided to attend 90 meetings in 90 days. At that time, I only had face to face meetings to go to. So I went to 90 face to face meetings in 90 days and just listened. And sometimes I would get up and talk a little bit about my media problem. And very often people would come up afterwards and tell me that they were experiencing similar problems with media, but no one had a solution. It was finally at a DA meeting that somebody, and that's Debtors Anonymous meeting, that somebody told me about another group, Under Earners Anonymous, and that they had in one of their meetings a television meeting, and they talked about getting time drunk on electronic media. This was the answer. I thought, okay. So I started to attend UA meetings and go to the television meeting. And I worked with an action partner on my media behaviors. I went to 90 meetings in 90 days in UA, called my action partner daily, and worked the program to the best of my ability. I thought that all I had to do was to keep my time and to plan when I would use my media and when I would work. My action partner, who'd been doing a lot of behavioral therapy, showed me how to urge surf, how to try to change my behavior around media, and how to use media without getting drunk on it. I was doing better and making progress, but then I would slip again, and then that would lead eventually to a binge. I wondered why she was able to keep to her plan and I wasn't. After about 9 months, she dropped me. I wonder if it was because I couldn't seem to stay sober with media. After that, I felt more desperate. I loved the television meeting in UA where you do meditate and share on the vision you got, but I still didn't hear the recovery from media addiction. I was beginning to get depressed again at what continued to be my compulsive behavior around media and the continual circling back into my disease. So I decided to start a new meeting um, in UA, and it was a media recovery meeting, and it was based on the OA concepts because media addiction is a lot like food addiction. You can't give food up completely. You still have to eat, and I still have to use media for work, family, and recovery needs. So I wanted to use that paradigm. I got another person to help me and put together a format with special tools for media time drunkenness and started our first meetings in January, and that was in 2019. He and I spent about 3 months getting all the kinks out before we listed or tried to list the meeting on the UA website. The way we got people to come, we would just announce it at meetings, and that's how people found us. But lots of times in that meeting, there was just he and myself um, just reading the script. So it was really slow getting it started. And after about 3 months, we submitted the format and it was rejected the first time. We reworked it again, and then the format was finally accepted and it was listed on the UA site. We had 3 meetings a week. I can't tell you how many times I led those meetings and read all the readings. But I was determined to keep at it. I had nowhere else to go. People came and went. My friend stopped going to the meetings, the person who helped me start it. But new people came in. No one was having a huge amount of success, but I knew that I was not going to recover from my under earning and my cave dwelling behaviors unless I could be sober with media. It just was not going to happen. I prayed for more help. I was willing to believe that when God guides, God provides. And I got that at the UA Back to Basics. In the middle of 2019, I attended a DA meeting, and I shared about my continual struggle with time debting, um, with media, time drunkenness behaviors. In that meeting, and I was so blessed because a woman who I've known for a very long time from other meetings called me after hearing me speak, and she said, "I have this media problem too. Will you sponsor me?" First of all, this woman is no joke. I had watched her recover in many programs, and she was amazing. So I felt a little intimidated by her because I thought she was so much more recovered than I was in so many ways. And she was asking me to sponsor her. In that moment, though, I felt that God had finally answered my prayers because I knew her well enough to know that she was as desperate as I was. And like me, she was all in. She was willing to do anything it takes to recover. And I just bless her soul every day. So we started working together. I didn't have a lot of media recovery, as I told her, but I'd been down the road a little longer. And what we did together was to explore the problem and try to find the solution. She jumped in and really helped to support the 3 media recovery UA meetings, did a lot of service, and helped me in ways to make our program so much better than I could have ever done alone, especially because she's really good at writing and editing. She just is an amazing woman. Um, so in UA, the Back to Basics program had really, really helped me because you go through the steps, in 1 week, and it's amazing to do that. So I began to wonder what it would look like if we used the Back to Basics for media addiction. So I took the UA Back to Basics script and started to put in media addiction terms. Now I want to say that here's where I really felt my higher power guiding me. And I actually want to say, and I feel a little emotional about saying this, but I really felt a lot of higher power guiding me through these last years, totally guiding me. So in my dreams on my walks for the next 6 months, as all of the sessions were being written, the information felt like it was kind of being downloaded into my meditation and dreams. I finally had the first drafts ready, and I started working with 2 wonderful women and taking them through it, and they were just great. Um, the first week, we would read all about step 1. And then the second week, we would take our fast and we'd do steps 2 through 5. The third week, we would do the 6 through 10 steps. And the fourth week, we did the 11th and 12th steps. And that first month was pretty successful. We had all made media sobriety plans. We learned more about our addictive behaviors and felt surely now we'd found the answer. So we started to get other people on board. And we kept these open back to basics groups going every month using the 1 week of media fasting in the second week. And we would always find some relief doing it. And we even did this in the EU group. Um, but then we began to see some patterns come up in the month that were repeated again and again. And we know that because it wasn't just one person, it wasn't just me, it was like we were all doing very similar things. So once we finished our fast, that second week fast, what would happen was we would all just let up a little and then try to work our media replacement plan, and then we would start to let up more, and then we would get triggered again on our media, and then we would binge on it, and we'd have a relapse. So we would come into the next month again, binging our brains out the first week, fast the second week, and then slip and slide the third and fourth weeks. And while it felt like we were making progress, still, many of us just felt like we just kept sliding back. So then, actually, a member that had been coming to some of our regular meetings told me about the OA, A Vision for You meetings. Now, I will ever, forever be grateful to her for giving me this information because this was another huge game changer. So these OA, and as I said before, on Overeaters Anonymous, OAers really know what it's like to have to use food and use substance every day. So these are like super solid big book step study meetings that work the steps according to the big book. I started listening to these meetings daily, and especially their special editions on Sunday. And I really began to hear what the problem with media addiction was, because it was the same problem as food addiction and the reason that we were continuing to slip and slide. I mean, seriously, we were really working our butts off. So it wasn't like we were being lazy and that we weren't committed, but there was information we didn't have, information that we had never understood in the big book that the OA Vision for You people had truly figured out. And as I said earlier, media addiction is a lot like food addiction. You have to eat and you have to use media daily. So, how can you do this safely? So, okay, so here's what I learned from the OA A Vision for You meetings. Okay, I have an illness and it is incurable. I'm going to say that again. I have an illness and it is incurable. That it is not a moral issue. I was not a bad person because I could not control my media drunk behaviors. That I had to accept the truth of my condition. That was that I had an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind, which means I am mentally and physically without power against the first click, the first slip, the first binge, that I could not so much as touch any alcoholic media, anything that triggered the obsession. Just like sugar or alcohol, when I put that triggering media into my body, my mind, my spirit, I wanted more, and it would trigger a binge. The way out means that I must surrender to a higher power greater than myself. That in the past I had merely been complying, hoping to recover by doing all the daily things I was told to do, but I had never really surrendered. I had to let my higher power have all of me and to take away all my obsessions and delusions, root and branch. I also learned that I had to be sober in every other program. In like for instance, I needed to be sober with food to try to work the steps and be sober in media at the same time. That I could not use any other drugs like food, spending, fantasy, etc., while working the steps. In AA, the alcoholic had to dry out before working the steps. I could not be using other addictions because I would not be honest enough to work the steps. This meant I had to stay sober in all my programs. And then only a spiritual way of living will cure my illness. And this spiritual living had to be ongoing. And that I could not do this without the help of a fellowship. I need gods with skins on them. To live a spiritual life, I must clear up everything that keeps me trapped in my illness. And then the last one, my media, just like my food, had to be neutral. That means that I could not use media to comfort me and relax me. So I looked at the reasons I wanted to use media, and I call them the 5 R's. And these R's may not be bad in and of themselves, but as a media addict, these reasons I had to really look at realistically. So I'm going to give you the 5 R's here. The first R is relief. I go to media to assuage my emotions, and yet it ends up making me more emotional when which then creates more emotions, especially the emotions of regret and remorse. The second R is reward. I want to reward myself for a great day's work, but then I end up overdoing it, which sends me back into time drunk blackouts and relapses so that my hard work has to just be built right back up again. Third R is relaxation. I turn to media to relax, and then it ends up exhausting me even more because I stay up all night, then the next night, then the next. Eventually, media strings out my nerves and my energy. The fourth R is recreation. So I want to say all humanity has been living for thousands of years without TV. If I had to add up all the time I have spent in front of a screen looking at it, comatose and hypnotized, it could probably be at least 10 years of my life. That is 10 years of my life. Now, if I went to prison for 10 years, I would totally feel like I missed out on 10 years of my life. And if I went to prison for a crime I hadn't committed, I would feel like someone had stolen 10 years of my life. But that is what I've done with my media. So now what? Is recreation with media really that important to me? Really? There is the whole world out there, so many other things to do, like hike, play games, go to places that are real rather than virtual, actually talking to real people. I have limited myself by only being on media, using it as my primary source of recreation. In this context, I see that it is an excuse not to use my own God-given creativity, that I limit myself with what could bring me enjoyment. The fifth R is relationship. When I go to media, I think I will feel connected, whether it is to a character, an online personality, or just on social media, but then end up feeling more lonely than before, more of a loser and more afraid of real people and having to deal with them. Using media for all my relationships because I distrust people or myself keeps me in the cycle of addiction. For as I stated earlier, addictions have to do with our inability to connect to people. I've also experienced four hidden R's. See if you relate to any of these. The R of research. Going online to research is a huge rabbit hole for me because the amount of information is mind boggling. Too much to know with never enough time to learn it all is hard on my psyche. The brain doesn't do well with too many choices. This has actually been studied. So it's easy to make excuses why I must stay hours and hours on my computer to research, but it truly affects my health and my sleep. Another R is revenge and retaliation, another hidden R, and that is arguing with people on social media. I now have the power to take someone down and make snarly comments because I'm anonymous. And in a way, I started to see that these are actually little subtle forms and acts of violence and that they don't line up with my principles. It's like death by a thousand cuts. I won't win that battle. And it makes me either feel better than, i.e., self righteous, or less than, compare and despair. And it takes me away from compassion for other people. It leads me to contempt for them and eventually contempt for myself. This affects my mental and physical health. And of course, the emotions then take me back to more media for relief. Another R, respect and validation. The compulsive need to prove myself through social media, websites, and other online methods to get as many people to think I am cool or right or that I am somebody important. I am looking to others for that. And if I do that, I will always be hungry and I will always be manipulative. Another secret R, renown and reputation. How many followers do I need to feel like I am somebody? My ego will never feel like it's good enough for if I even have millions of people liking me every day. It's not going to make me feel liked. In fact, it might even make me feel like a fraud. So all of these R's can lead me to remorse and regret, which then leads to resolve to never binge on media again. And at last, I found enough willingness to replace all my R's with the R of recovery. So after learning what I did from the OA people, from the Vision for You meetings, um, we began to change our back to basics classes to reflect this new information. All of a sudden, as we did this, we really began to recover. When we got rid of all the media that was triggering and only used the media that was neutral, we stopped getting triggered and therefore we stopped slipping and sliding. We had found the solution. I didn't like the solution at first. I was hoping that one day I could hold my media like a gentlewoman. I hoped that I was not a media addict of the hopeless variety. But I finally had to accept that I was not going to be able to ever use the things that triggered me again. Working the steps while being sober on media has been the most amazing journey of my life. I don't think I have ever been this honest. getting through all my amends, some that I had planned to do from other programs and had procrastinated on, was actually like a dopamine hit in itself. The amount of relief and freedom I felt was amazing. I actually reconnected with my childhood friend who I spoke about earlier, who I had abandoned with media, and I apologized to her, and we both just cried over a Zoom. It was so beautiful and heart opening. My former relationships have been cleared up and replaced with really beautiful, good feelings. The respect of my children has been heightened, and they really have a lot more confidence in me. And I have more confidence in myself. And I can feel my own personal self esteem growing because my mind is clear. um, I have just felt freedom like I've never felt before. And I was beginning to understand what real honesty looked like. So each time I was honest with myself and others, miracles have happened. So here is what I learned and what I did to recover. I learned that I had to be honest about my illness and accept myself for who I am and what I've done in the past. I became willing to have faith, to act as if there is a source that can bring me back from my mental insanity, to restore my mind back to clarity. And I made a pact with this source, a kind of contract or commitment or even a covenant to this source to offer up all I am to this great play of life and to allow this source to direct my life play. I took stock of my assets and liabilities. I put them down on paper so I could honestly see them. I got a witness and shared this with the real live person. I confessed everything and found that instead of a censorial judge, I had a true, compassionate comrade. I found relief from all the self loathing I had carried throughout my life. I humbled myself before the God of my understanding. I gave this my higher power, who I really found was my new friend in so many ways. I gave this power the good of me and the bad of me. And I became willing to clean my side of the street. I made amends even though I was fearful or felt that others did more wrong than I did. And with each amends, I felt freer and more alive because I was not burning up energy or poisoning myself by holding on to resentments. I also started to really connect with people in ways that I never did before because I have learned to be humble and honest. I committed to perseverance, to daily keeping aware of my self pitying, controlling, and self centered tendencies, and just like a smart chef, clean up my mess as I go along. I try not to take yesterday's resentments and problems into today. Because I have an incurable illness, I have to take my medicine every day. But the good news is, if I do, my symptoms go away or become very minor. I practice two-way prayer. I enjoyed I enjoy every day spending time with the source that has taken me through this landmine of recovery. And I began to see that God is doing for me what I could not do for myself. I began to realize that all I have ever been looking for in the food, in the fantasy relationships, in new and shiny possessions, in the validation from others, in trying to make myself look good, righteous, important, and all the constant research and wanting to know more and learn more, and all the movies, TV shows, political discussions in media, all of that has just been for one purpose, really, to find God. It's not that God is not there, for God is everywhere. Like, where isn't there God, right? But media distracted me from going right to the source. Parts of the world that wanted to play God in my life, I allowed that. I thought that is what I should do. But these sources couldn't give me power. I had to find real power. I had to go to the real source of power, to say the sacred yes to that power, and to say the sacred no to what distracted me from that power. As I have found this power, this source, I've begun to truly find myself, my true nature. I was looking for God in all the wrong places, but now I know where God is. God is in my heart, by my side, walking with me day by day. We are a team, and I don't make any important decisions without my director. I now have a way out, and the way out turned out to also be the way in. I went within, and nothing filled me up more than that. And lastly, because of this amazing relationship, I am now God's agent. I am here to give and to serve, to take others through the steps as I was guided through them through the big book. Not everyone, only those who want this particular solution. And to keep what I have to give it away. And also, and this is most importantly, I absolutely insist on enjoying my life without media. The big book authors say we absolutely insist on enjoying life. We try not to indulge in the cynicism over the state of the nations, nor do we carry the world's troubles on our shoulders. When we see a person sinking into the mire, that is alcoholism, or in our case, media addiction, we give them first aid and place what we have at their disposal. And the big book gave me some great advice for trying to control the world and save everyone. It says, those of us who have tried to shoulder the entire burden and troubles of others find we are soon overcome by them. So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. But why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered and have been given the power to help others. We cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears, though it was just that for many of us. But it is clear that we made our own misery. God didn't do that. Avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery, which is exactly what I did by getting involved in the news. I know but a little. God is revealing more and more each day. I have real I have realistic expectations for myself. I know that I may be recovered, but I am not cured. I have one day just like everyone else. I am still newly sober. We all are because we're a new program, and as of giving this talk, there are 5 of us who are recovered media addicts and hopefully more to follow. I must serve to live, and so I live to serve. That is all this has been about for me from the very start, was I needed to serve. I used to go to 12-step groups and say, let me get this program as soon as I can and be out of here as fast as I can. I do not want to hang around with all these losers. And it's totally the opposite today. I have grown to love the members of these 12-step programs, especially the members of Media Addicts Anonymous. They are people I admire deeply. Most of them are no stranger to addictions and the 12-step programs. Many have succeeded in recovering from other addictions, but were confounded that even with all that recovery, they still could not stop binging on media. I am still unpacking the good and the bad when it comes to media. There have been some powerful, life-changing moments that have come through watching movies, podcasts, research, etc. But the freedom I have now is not worth watching anything that I think will create a past dopamine high experience. I trust my higher power to give those to me now. Because media arrested my ability to interact with real people, I hadn't developed the skills and the thicker skin to handle real people. But I have been learning to do that in my sobriety. My heart has opened in ways I never could have expected. When my father was dying of Alzheimer, I was sober at the time and I felt so much joy and love for him. He burst my heart open. That never would have happened if I had been binging on media. Excuse me. Miracles happen to me every day. New and extraordinary people are coming into my life, and opportunities are opening up for me, and I am doing nothing for it. It's all higher power. When the big book says a new life has been given us, and that we have gone from bitter hopelessness into the sunlight of spirit, I know firsthand what all the fuss has been about. The 12 steps, when taken according to the big book, really do work. But I had to be sober from all my addictions to work them. There was no easier, softer way. There are some games that you don't get to play unless you are all in. After so much strife, delusional thinking, and failure, eventually I wanted recovery more than I wanted media. I was all in. I used to run away from life and hid my fears in media. Today I say, bring it on, because life is going to come in anyway. I either face it or I run from it. But whatever it is the inevitable. To face life on life's terms, I need a clear mind. Media fogged up my brain and strung me out emotionally. Today, I enjoy clarity even if what I see is not what I prefer. I look at life as if everything is happening for me, not to me. Everything is a gift. I always have something to be grateful for every moment. Even my media addiction has been a gift, for it has been part of my journey. And because I was so desperate to recover, I went through the steps which transformed my character in one of the fastest possible ways. What would have taken years of therapy and work, I was able to accomplish in 90 days, just like they say in the Back to Basics groups. I now have an honest way to be of service to others who have similar conditions. It connects me to each of you in a real way. The big book authors say AA, or in our case, Media Addicts Anonymous, does not teach us how to handle our drinking or media addiction. It teaches us how to handle sobriety. It's no trick to stop drinking or using media. The trick is to stay stopped. I have come to AA and MAA to learn how to handle sobriety, which is what I could not handle in the first place. That's why I drank. In Media Addicts Anonymous, we understand media addiction behavior better than family and friends ever will. We support each other in ways no one else can because others may not understand our need to be sober from media. To be in a media sober community built together in unity, recovering from media addiction one day at a time and living the 12 steps, that for us is a blessed place to be. You are no longer alone. You matter. You have the potential to connect to others in significant and deeper ways. We now know that media is a mind altering and mood altering drug. It is our dope or dopamine high. We have a physical allergy to media because of its mood altering effects on the body. Because we have overused media in the past, this has affected our brains and we have lost the ability to use it with impunity. In addition to this physical allergy, we have a mental obsession, which means we may be able to be media sober for a period of time, but because of our obsession, we will always get drunk again. We turn to media for relief, reward, recreation, relaxation, and relationship, but then end up with deep regret and remorse. We have a mental block, an inability to remember how bad the last binge or media blackout was. So we pick up again and again without any thought to the consequences on our lives or others. Our minds rationalize the severity of our addiction and we revert back into the cycle of compulsive behavior. Media addiction, like alcoholism, is a disease. It is not a moral issue. We are not bad people or weak willed. When we ingest media, we have an allergic response to it, which triggers the obsession to need more and use more media. The solution is a spiritual one. Unless we have an entire psychic change, we cannot hope to become sober and stay sober with media. The 12 steps of AA and MAA are the solution to having this psychic change. And if we want to be truly free of our compulsion to get drunk on media, live our lives without medicating ourselves with media, we have to be all in. We have to be willing to go to any length to achieve this recovery. I was willing to abandon and sell my soul for media. It became the most important thing in my life. It's all I wanted day or night. It's all I thought about. Like a big whale, it swallowed me up and I abandoned my purpose and goals and abandoned other people for it. Mostly, I abandoned my relationship with God. But I see now that in all my addiction, all I was really looking for was God, was a power greater than my ego, my addictions. When I finally found God, I found myself. My worth today comes from my higher source, not from outside source. I don't need to go to the internet for important life answers today because I have my own inner net, which connects me to the source of all knowledge and power. In closing, I would like to thank the year 2020, for this was the year that I began to have 2020 eyesight into my media addiction and found clarity and a solution. Because of the virus this year, I couldn't see clients, so I was able to build a website and spend more time working on Media Addicts Anonymous. Because of the worldwide lockdown, more people were having issues with media addiction, and many people started to look for help. This year, our membership and meetings really grew. 2020 was the year we found a solution and the year I was able to recover. For these reasons, I will always be grateful for the year 2020. Thank you for listening. And with that, I'll pass.